The desert wind arrived every evening like clockwork, swallowing the frontier town of Dust Halo in waves of red grit that coated everything: windows, door frames, the crooked teeth of men drinking away their failures at the saloon. The town sat at the edge of the Sangre Flats ranch lands, a place people ended up when every other road had closed behind them. Marin Vale stumbled into Dust Halo just after sundown on a Tuesday, though she'd long ago stopped tracking days properly. Time meant nothing when you were running. What mattered was distance. What mattered was staying ahead of memories that chased you harder than any living pursuer. She carried a canvas sack that held everything she owned: 2 changes of clothes, a hunting knife with a loose handle, a tin cup, and a photograph she should have burned years ago but couldn't. Her boots were split at the seams, held together with wire and stubbornness. Her hair, once carefully braided each morning, now hung in a tangled mess the color of dust and smoke. She was 32 years old and looked 50. The Dust Halo saloon squatted at the end of Main Street like a tired dog too mean to die. Marin pushed through the doors and felt every conversation stop. 15 pairs of eyes tracked her movement across the room, assessing, judging, dismissing. A woman alone on the frontier told one of 3 stories. She was running from the law, running from a man, or too stupid to know she should be running from both. In Marin's case, all 3 were partially true. "We don't give handouts," the bartender said before Marin could speak. He was a thick-necked man with burns scarring the left side of his face, probably from some range fire that should have killed him. His name was Dutch, though Marin wouldn't learn that until later. "Wasn't asking for one," Marin replied. Her voice came out rougher than she intended, scraped raw from 3 days without water. "Need coffee? Need work. Need a corner to sleep in." The specificity of that request, a corner, not a room or a bed, told Dutch everything. This woman expected nothing, which meant life had already taken everything. "Coffee's 2 bits, Dutch said. "Don't have 2 bits. Marin set her canvas sack on the bar. "But I can wash glasses until I earn it, or scrub floors, or cook if you need someone who knows the difference between salt and arsenic." A few men chuckled at that. One of them, a rancher named Petey with tobacco-stained whiskers, called out, "Hell, Dutch, give her the coffee. Woman looks half dead already." Dutch poured lukewarm coffee into a chipped mug and slid it across the bar. Marin wrapped both hands around it like it was gold. She didn't drink immediately, just held it, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "There's a broom in back," Dutch said. "Floor needs sweeping. You do a decent job, I'll give you soup and you can sleep in the storage room tonight. But you're gone by morning. Don't need the kind of trouble that follows women like you." Marin nodded. She'd heard variations of that speech in a dozen towns. Women like you. It meant women who'd survived things decent people preferred not to think about. She spent the next 3 hours sweeping a floor that probably hadn't seen a broom in months. The work felt good, purposeful. It gave her hands something to do besides shake. Around 9 o'clock, the door opened again. 6 men walked in, and the entire atmosphere of the saloon shifted. They moved like a single organism, despite their different sizes and builds, fluid, aware, dangerous in the way that working animals are dangerous. Not violent for the sake of it, but capable of devastating force if provoked. The Calder brothers. Even Marin, who'd been in Dust Halo less than 4 hours, recognized them from the conversation she'd overheard while sweeping. Everyone in the Sangre Flats knew about the Calders. Cattle ranchers who'd built an empire through sheer stubbornness and their mother's iron will. Then their mother died 6 months ago, and the empire started crumbling. Rowan Calder entered first. He was the oldest at 38, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair going gray at the temples. He had the kind of face that probably smiled easily once, before grief had carved deeper lines into it. Now he just looked tired, the bone-deep exhaustion of a man carrying weight he couldn't put down. Behind him came Jace, the second eldest, handsome in a reckless way, with split knuckles and a scar through his left eyebrow. He moved like a man looking for a fight he'd probably win but wouldn't enjoy. Then Levi, quieter, watching everything with eyes that missed nothing. He was the one who noticed Marin immediately, his gaze lingering on her like he was cataloging every detail for later examination. The twins, Noah and Silas, came next. Identical except for the fact that Noah laughed too loud and Silas barely spoke. They were 26 and still carried themselves like boys playing at being men. Finally, Eli stumbled in last. The youngest at 23, skinny and awkward, with hands too big for his body and dreams too big for the frontier. He wanted to be a writer, Marin would learn later. Wanted to escape to some eastern city where people cared about stories instead of survival. "Whiskey," Rowan said to Dutch. "The whole bottle." Dutch set out 6 glasses without being asked. This was clearly ritual. The brothers took their usual table in the back corner. Marin kept sweeping, trying to be invisible, but Levi kept watching her. It made her skin itch. "New girl?" Jace asked Dutch, loud enough for Marin to hear. "Just passing through," Dutch replied. "Gone tomorrow." "She got a name?" "Didn't ask." Marin focused on sweeping the same section of floor she'd already cleaned twice. "Don't engage, don't make eye contact, don't give them any reason to remember you." But Rowan stood up and crossed the room toward her. Up close, he was even taller than she'd thought. He studied her with an intensity that made her want to run, but she'd learned long ago that running from attention only made you more interesting. "You looking for work?" Rowan asked. "Already got work," Marin replied, gripping the broom handle. "Sweeping floors." "I mean real work, steady work." "This is steady enough." Rowan glanced at Dutch, who shrugged. "What's your name?" Rowan asked. Marin hesitated. Names were dangerous. Names could be traced, but lying would make her more memorable than the truth. "Marin Vale." "You got family around here, Marin?" "No." "Where you coming from?" "North?" "That's a direction, not an answer." "It's the only answer you're getting." Jace laughed from the table. "She's got spine, Rowan. I like her already." Rowan ignored his brother. "We need help out at our ranch, cooking, cleaning, mending, basic household work, room and board, plus $20 a month." $20 was generous, too generous, which meant something was wrong. "Why me?" Marin asked. "Because you look like someone who needs work, and we need someone who can work. Plenty of women in town who can cook and clean. Town women talk too much. We need someone who minds their own business." There it was. They didn't want help. They wanted secrecy. Whatever was happening at the Calder Ranch, they needed someone who wouldn't gossip about it afterward. Every instinct Marin had screamed at her to refuse. Getting involved with 6 men in an isolated ranch was exactly the kind of situation that ended badly for women like her. But she was so goddamn tired of running. "1 week," Marin said. "I'll give you 1 week, and then I'm gone." "Fair enough." Rowan extended his hand. Marin stared at it for a long moment before shaking. His palm was calloused and rough, the hand of a man who worked with rope and cattle and land that fought back. "We leave at dawn," Rowan said. "Be ready." But the Calder Ranch sat 15 miles east of Dust Halo, surrounded by scrubland that stretched to the horizon like an ocean of nothing. The house itself was larger than Marin expected, 2 stories with a wraparound porch and actual glass windows, which meant the Calders had money once, even if they were struggling now. But something felt wrong the moment she arrived. Every window blazed with lamplight despite the morning sun. Lanterns hung from fence posts, the barn doors, even the well cover. It looked like they were trying to hold back darkness through sheer force of light. "Why so many lamps?" Marin asked as they rode up. The brothers exchanged glances. Finally, Eli spoke up. "Ma didn't like the dark. Said shadows were where loneliness lived. When she died, we just kept the lamps burning. Stupid, probably." It wasn't stupid. It was grief trying to pretend it wasn't grief. Inside, the house was chaos disguised as organization. Dishes piled in the sink, laundry scattered across furniture. The stove cold and unused. The pantry stocked with supplies, but arranged by men who'd clearly never had to actually cook with them. "Ma handled all this," Rowan said quietly. "We've been trying, but—" "You've been surviving," Marin finished. "Not living." Rowan nodded. Marin set down her canvas sack. "Show me where I'm sleeping." They led her upstairs to a room that clearly belonged to the mother. Everything was still in place. Dresses hanging in the wardrobe, hairbrush on the dresser, reading glasses beside the bed, like she'd just stepped out for a moment. "You can't put me in here," Marin said. "It's the only spare room," Jace replied. "Unless you want to bunk with one of us. Give me the room, but pack up her things first. Put them somewhere safe, an attic or storage. You're not honoring her by leaving everything frozen in place. You're just hiding from the fact that she's gone." The words came out harsher than Marin intended, but sometimes truth didn't have soft edges. Levi's jaw tightened. "You've been here 10 minutes and you're already telling us how to grieve." I'm telling you how to breathe, Marin shot back. There's a difference. Rowan held up a hand before the argument could escalate. She's right. We'll pack up Ma's things this afternoon. Marin, get settled. I'll show you the kitchen. Fuck. That first day, Marin learned the depth of the disaster she'd walked into. The kitchen was a battlefield of abandoned meals and rotting supplies. The brothers had been eating whatever didn't require actual cooking: dried meat, hardtack, canned beans. The stove worked, but barely. The water pump squeaked like a dying animal. Marin rolled up her sleeves. By noon, she had the stove repaired using wire and stubbornness. By early afternoon, she'd cleaned the entire kitchen until it resembled something functional. By evening, she'd cooked the first proper meal the brothers had eaten in months: venison stew with actual vegetables, fresh bread, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. The brothers ate in silence, but Marin could feel the shift in the room. This was what they'd been missing. Not just food, but the ritual of it. The act of sitting down together as a family instead of 6 isolated men shoveling fuel into their bodies. "This is good," Noah said finally. "It's better than good," Silas added. Jace just grunted and went back for seconds. Rowan caught Marin's eye across the table and nodded, a small gesture of gratitude that somehow meant more than words. After dinner, Marin started on the laundry. The brothers had been washing clothes by throwing them in the creek and hoping for the best, which explained why everything smelled like mildew and regret. She worked until midnight, hanging shirts and trousers on lines strung across the back porch. The night air was cold and sharp, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "You don't have to do all this in one day." Marin turned to find Rowan standing in the doorway. "If I stop, I'll think too much," she replied. "About what?" "About the fact that this is the first place I've felt safe in 3 years, and how badly that's going to hurt when I have to leave." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "What are you running from, Marin?" "Everything. Nothing. Does it matter?" "Maybe not, but you're safe here, for whatever that's worth." "Safety's an illusion," Marin said. "Something bad always finds you eventually. Then we'll deal with it when it does." Rowan went back inside, leaving Marin alone with the laundry and her own thoughts. The days developed a rhythm. Marin woke before dawn to rebuild the kitchen fire. She cooked breakfast while the brothers handled morning chores: feeding cattle, repairing fences, checking water supplies. She spent mornings cleaning, afternoons mending clothes and organizing supplies, evenings preparing dinner. It was simple work, invisible work, the kind of labor that disappeared the moment it was finished, but it mattered. The house started feeling lived in again instead of haunted. The brothers began talking during meals instead of eating in silence. Small jokes emerged. Laughter returned, tentative at first, then more genuine. Marin learned their patterns. Rowan woke earliest, carrying the weight of maintaining the ranch on shoulders that never fully relaxed. He kept ledger books hidden in his room, working on finances late into the night. The ranch was drowning in debt, though he didn't want the others to know how bad it had gotten. Jace disappeared into town twice a week, always coming back with split knuckles and a darker mood. He was fighting his grief with violence, looking for something to hit that would hurt less than the empty space their mother left behind. Levi watched Marin constantly, waiting for her to steal something or betray them. He trusted no one, which meant someone had broken that trust before. The twins argued endlessly about nothing: whose turn it was to fix the barn door, whether the weather would hold, what their mother would have thought about some trivial decision. The arguments were just an excuse to keep talking about her without crying. Eli spent every spare moment writing in a leather journal, filling pages with stories he'd probably never show anyone. He reminded Marin of herself before the world taught her that dreams were luxuries people like them couldn't afford. By the end of the first week, Marin had planned to leave. Instead, she stayed another week, then another. The problem was, she was starting to care about them, and caring was dangerous. They might. 6 weeks after Marin arrived, winter hit the Sangre Flats like a hammer. The first snowstorm arrived without warning, dumping 3 feet of snow overnight and dropping temperatures low enough to freeze cattle where they stood. The brothers worked around the clock trying to save the herd, driving animals into shelter, breaking ice off water troughs, hauling hay through drifts that came up to their waists. Marin kept the house running, hot food ready whenever the brothers stumbled in, half-frozen, dry clothes waiting, fires burning in every room. She learned to read the weather by watching how the cattle moved, how the wind shifted. She started keeping emergency supplies packed in case they got snowed in. And she started to see cracks forming in the family. One night, Rowan and Jace got into a screaming match in the kitchen that almost turned violent. Jace wanted to sell off part of the herd to cover debts. Rowan refused, convinced they could survive until spring if they were careful. "We're already starving the cattle," Jace shouted. "We're rationing feed like we're preparing for a goddamn siege." "Because we are preparing for a siege," Rowan shot back. "Winter's only started. If we sell now, we'll have nothing left by March. If we don't sell now, the bank's going to take everything anyway." Marin stepped between them. "Both of you shut up and sit down." They stared at her. "Sit down." They sat. Marin pulled out the ledger books she'd found in Rowan's room. She'd been studying them for weeks, teaching herself the basic math of running a ranch. "You're both wrong," she said. "Selling cattle now means taking bottom dollar prices because everyone's selling. But Rowan, you can't keep pretending the debt doesn't exist, so here's what we do." She laid out a plan. Sell the weakest cattle to free up feed for the stronger ones. Cut deals with neighboring ranches to share resources instead of competing. Send Eli into town to work part-time at the general store for cash. Reduce household expenses everywhere possible. It wasn't perfect, but it was a plan. "How do you know all this?" Levi asked suspiciously. "I was married to a cattle trader once," Marin replied. "Learned the business before I learned he was a bastard." It was the first real piece of her past she'd shared. Rowan studied the numbers she'd written out. "This could work." "It will work," Marin said, "if you stop fighting each other and start fighting the winter instead." The brothers agreed to try her plan, and for the first time since their mother died, they started functioning as a unit again instead of 6 separate disasters. But outside the ranch, Dust Halo was starting to talk. A lone woman living with 6 unmarried brothers in the middle of nowhere was enough to wake every ugly rumor the frontier could conjure. At the general store, at the saloon, at church on Sundays, people whispered. What kind of woman lives alone with 6 men? Probably warming all their beds. Probably running from the law. Probably a whore. Marin heard the gossip secondhand through Eli, who worked in town 3 days a week. At first she didn't care. She'd heard worse about herself before. But then the whispers started affecting the brothers' business. A supply merchant refused to sell to Rowan without payment up front, something he'd never required before. A neighboring rancher made a crude joke about sharing Marin when Jace went to discuss water rights. At the saloon, Dutch asked Levi if the brothers were planning to make an honest woman of her, or just keep using her. The frontier was turning against them because of her. Worse still, Marin started recognizing faces in Dust Halo. Men who'd worked the cattle routes years ago when she was married. Men who might remember her from before, when she went by a different name and her husband was alive. One of those men was named Carson Briggs, a lean, mean bastard with yellow teeth and a grudge against anyone who'd ever crossed him. Marin had testified against him during a trial for cattle rustling 5 years ago. He shouldn't have been in Dust Halo. He should have been in prison. But there he was, drinking at Dutch's saloon, staring at Marin like he was trying to place where he knew her from. Marin knew she needed to run. Every instinct screamed at her to pack her canvas sack and disappear before Briggs remembered who she was. But leaving meant abandoning the Calders. Leaving meant going back to being alone. And for the first time in years, Marin wasn't sure she could survive being alone anymore. The confrontation came on a frozen February morning. Marin was in town buying supplies when Carson Briggs cornered her behind the general store. "I know you," he said, blocking her path. "Took me a while, but I remember. You're that cattle trader's widow, the one who ran after he got himself killed." "You've got me confused with someone else," Marin replied, hand drifting toward the knife in her belt. "Nah, I never forget a face, especially not a face that put me in jail for 3 years. You put yourself in jail by stealing cattle." Briggs smiled, revealing those yellow teeth. "I heard your husband got shot during a range dispute. Real tragic. But I also heard he was running guns with Vernon Crow's operation before he died, and that you knew all about it." Marin's blood went cold at the name Vernon Crow. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't. Question is, does Vernon know you're here? Because last I heard he's been looking for his old partner's widow. Something about loose ends needing tied up. Briggs walked away, laughing. Marin stood frozen behind the general store, mind racing. Vernon Crow, the name she'd spent 3 years running from. The man who'd ordered her husband killed when he'd tried to back out of the weapons smuggling operation. The man who'd killed 2 innocent settlers who'd stumbled onto their operation near the Texas border. If Crow found out where she was, he'd send men to silence her permanently. She knew too much about his operation, routes, buyers, bribes. Her testimony could destroy him, which meant she'd just brought a death sentence to the Calder ranch. Marin finished buying supplies with shaking hands and rode back to the ranch. She needed to leave. Tonight. Before Briggs contacted Crow. Before armed killers showed up looking for her. She packed her canvas sack after dinner while the brothers were outside handling evening chores. Everything she owned fit inside easily. She'd learned to travel light. But when she reached for the photograph she always carried, her hand stilled. It was a picture of her and her husband on their wedding day, both of them young and stupid, and believing love could protect them from the world's cruelty. She'd kept it as a reminder of who she'd been before everything fell apart. Now she realized she didn't want to be that person anymore. Marin left the photograph on the dresser and finished packing. She made it as far as the barn before Rowan found her. "Going somewhere?" he asked quietly. "I need to leave." "Why?" "Because staying will get you killed." Rowan stepped closer. "Explain." So Marin told him everything. About her husband's involvement with Vernon Crow's weapons operation. About the murders she'd witnessed. About running for 3 years. About Carson Briggs recognizing her in town that morning. When she finished, Rowan was silent for a long moment. "You should have told us sooner," he finally said. "I know, I'm sorry. I thought maybe I could stay and nothing would happen. But Briggs is going to contact Crow, and then men will come, and anyone near me will die. I've seen what Crow does to people who get in his way." "So you're running again." "It's what I do. It's what keeps me alive." "And what kind of life is that?" Marin had no answer. Rowan took the canvas sack from her hands and set it aside. "You're not running this time, Marin. Not from this. You don't understand. I understand that you're part of this family now. I understand that we don't abandon each other. I understand that if Vernon Crow wants to come for you, he's going to have to go through all 6 of us first." "That's insane." "Maybe, but I'm done losing people I care about." The confession hung in the air between them. People I care about. Before Marin could respond, Levi appeared in the barn doorway. "Thought I heard voices. What's going on?" Rowan explained the situation. Within minutes, all 6 brothers had gathered in the barn. "So let me get this straight," Jay said. "Some weapons smuggler from Texas might send killers after Marin, and she was planning to just run off and handle it alone?" "That was the plan," Marin admitted. "Well, that's the stupidest plan I've ever heard." "Agreed," Levi said. "If armed men are coming, we need to prepare, not scatter." "We could contact the sheriff," Eli suggested. "Sheriff's useless," Noah replied. "Probably bought off anyway." "Then we handle it ourselves," Rowan said, "like we handle everything else." Marin looked around at the 6 brothers. These men who barely knew her, who had every reason to throw her out, who were instead choosing to stand with her against a threat that could destroy them all. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you risk yourselves for me?" Rowan met her eyes. "Because you asked for a corner to sleep in, and we gave you a home. That means something out here. That means we protect our own." For the first time in 3 years, Marin felt something crack open inside her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. "All right," she said. "Then we'd better get ready, because when Crow comes, he won't come alone." The brothers nodded. And in that frozen barn, surrounded by men who'd chosen to stand beside her instead of running, Marin Vale made a decision that would change everything. She stopped running. She chose to fight. The next morning, Marin began teaching the Calder brothers how to survive a war. She started by explaining Vernon Crow's tactics. He wouldn't come directly. That wasn't his style. He'd start with pressure, cutting off supplies, spreading rumors, turning neighbors against them, making life unbearable until they were isolated and desperate. Then he'd strike. "So we prepare for siege," Rowan said. "Exactly." Marin drew maps of the ranch in the dirt, marking vulnerable points. The north pasture was too exposed. The creek could be poisoned. The road into town could be blocked. The barn was a fire hazard. They spent days reinforcing weak points, digging backup wells, building secondary supply caches buried underground, developing signal systems using lanterns that could communicate across the property at night. Levi, paranoid as he was, proved invaluable. He thought like someone expecting betrayal, which meant he anticipated problems before they happened. Jace taught everyone to shoot properly. Marin was already decent with a rifle, but Jace made her better. The twins scouted escape routes through the canyon systems beyond the ranch, mapping paths that could be used to flee or flank enemies. Eli, despite being the youngest and least experienced, became their intelligence gatherer. He'd go into town, listen to gossip, and report back on anything unusual. They were preparing for a war that might never come, but Marin had survived long enough to know that the moment you stopped preparing was the moment disaster arrived. Vernon Crow's first move came 3 weeks later. The supply wagon that was supposed to deliver flour, coffee, and medicine never showed up. When Rowan rode into Dust Halo to check on it, the merchant claimed the Calders' credit had been revoked. "Since when?" Rowan demanded. "Since I got a telegram from a Texas businessman saying you folks were poor risks. Said you might be involved in illegal activities." "That's a lie." "Maybe, but I can't afford to take chances. Cash only from now on." It was the same story at the feed store, the blacksmith, and the general store. Someone had spread poison about the Calders across town, and no one wanted to do business with them anymore. When Rowan returned to the ranch, he was furious. "Crow's making his move," Marin said. "He's cutting us off, forcing us to burn through our reserves. When we're weak enough, he'll attack." "Then we accelerate our timeline," Levi said. "Stop waiting for him to make the first move." "And do what?" Eli asked. "Hit back." Marin shook her head. "We're not starting a war, we're just going to survive one." But surviving, she was learning, sometimes required becoming the thing you feared most. Wolk. That night, Marin couldn't sleep. She stood on the porch, watching the lanterns burn across the property, small points of light holding back an ocean of darkness. The desert wind carried the scent of snow and sage and something else she couldn't name. Fear, maybe. Or inevitability. Can't sleep either? She turned to find Eli sitting on the porch steps, his journal open in his lap. "Too much thinking," Marin replied. "What are you thinking about?" "Whether I made the right choice." "Staying." Eli was quiet for a moment. "My ma used to say that running from fear is different than running toward hope. Both look the same from the outside, but one of them wears you down until there's nothing left." Your mother sounds like she was wise. She was, but she was also terrified all the time. She just didn't let it stop her. "That's what brave actually is," she said, "being scared and doing the thing anyway." Marin looked at the youngest Calder brother and realized he understood more than she'd given him credit for. "You're going to make it out of here someday," she said. "You're going to write your stories in some big city and forget all about this frozen ranch in the middle of nowhere." "Maybe," Eli replied, "but I'll never forget the woman who taught us that family isn't just blood. It's choosing to stand beside someone when running would be easier." He went back inside, leaving Marin alone with the wind and the lanterns and the weight of what was coming. Somewhere out there in the darkness, Vernon Crow was planning his next move, and Marin knew that when the real violence started, not all of them would survive it. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't facing it alone. That had to count for something. The attack on the North Pasture came during a moonless night when the temperature had dropped so low that breath turned to ice before it left your lungs. Marin woke to the sound of cattle screaming, a noise she'd never heard before and would never forget. It was the sound of animals dying badly. She was dressed and armed in seconds, her fingers clumsy with cold as she grabbed the rifle Jace had insisted she keep beside the bed. Through the window, she could see flames licking up from the direction of the winter grazing area, orange light dancing against black sky. Rowan was already downstairs shouting orders. "Jace, Levi, North Pasture now. Noah, Silas, check the other herds. Eli, ring the bell." The old dinner bell hanging from the porch beam started clanging, its sound cutting through the frozen air like a knife. It was their signal that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Marin ran outside without a coat. The cold hit her like a fist, but she barely felt it. Adrenaline was a hell of a drug. "How many?" she called to Rowan as he swung onto his horse. "Don't know yet. Stay here and watch the house." "Like hell I will." She grabbed the reins of another horse and pulled herself up. She'd learned to ride during her marriage to the cattle trader, though she'd never loved it. Horses were mean, stupid animals that wanted to kill you, but they were faster than running. Rowan looked like he wanted to argue, but there wasn't time. He kicked his horse forward, and Marin followed. The north pasture was chaos. 30 head of cattle stampeding in every direction, spooked by fire and the smell of blood. In the flickering light, Marin could see at least 3 animals down, throats cut, left to bleed out in the snow. This wasn't predators. This was human cruelty. Jace and Levi were already trying to calm the herd, voices hoarse from shouting. The twins appeared from the west, rifles raised, scanning the darkness for whoever had done this. But the attackers were gone. They'd struck fast and disappeared into the night like smoke. "Check the fences," Rowan ordered. "See if they cut the wire anywhere." Levi rode the perimeter and returned 10 minutes later. "North fence is down. Wire cut clean. Professional job." "How many got out?" Jace asked. "Maybe a dozen head. Could be halfway to the canyon by now." Rowan dismounted and stood staring at the dead cattle. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words too bitter to spit out. "Put down anything that's suffering. We'll butcher what we can salvage tomorrow." It took the rest of the night to restore order. By dawn, they'd accounted for most of the missing cattle and repaired the fence. But the damage was done. 3 animals dead, 5 more injured badly enough that they'd have to be put down. The loss represented money the Calders didn't have and meat they couldn't afford to waste. Back at the house, Marin made coffee while the brothers cleaned blood from their hands and tried to process what had happened. "This was Crow," Levi said flatly. "Had to be." "We don't know that," Rowan replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "Who else would it be? Someone cuts our fences, kills our cattle, and disappears without stealing anything? That's not theft. That's a message." Jay slammed his fist on the table. "So what's the message? That he can reach us anytime he wants? That we're helpless?" "The message," Marin said quietly, "is that he wants us scared, wants us making mistakes, wants us turning on each other." Everyone looked at her. "Crow's strategy is always the same," she continued. "He applies pressure until people break from the inside. Then he moves in and takes what he wants without much resistance. We can't let that happen." "Easy to say," Jace muttered. "Harder to do when we're losing cattle we can't afford to lose." "Then we make him pay for it," Levi said. Rowan shook his head. "We're not starting a range war. He already started it, and we're not finishing it by burning down his property or killing his men. That's exactly what he wants, an excuse to come at us with everything he's got." The brothers argued while Marin listened. She understood both sides. Rowan was trying to keep them from becoming the kind of people who solved problems with violence. Levi wanted revenge. Jace wanted to hit something. The twins were just scared, though they'd never admit it. But Eli surprised everyone by speaking up. "What if we document everything?" They all turned to stare at him. "I mean, what if we start keeping records? Dates, times, what happened, who we suspect. Then when this is over, we have evidence. We can take it to territorial authorities, maybe even federal marshals. Show a pattern of harassment." "Federal marshals don't give a damn about dead cattle," Jace said. "No, but they care about organized criminal activity. If we can prove Crow is running a systematic campaign to seize land through intimidation, that's different than just a property dispute." Marin felt something shift in her chest. The kid's right. Crow's been doing this for years, buying off local law, terrorizing small ranchers, taking over land. If we can document it, build a real case, we might be able to stop him legally. "And in the meantime," Levi demanded, "we just let him kill our livestock and burn our property?" "In the meantime, we defend ourselves smart," Marin replied. "We document, we prepare, and we make damn sure he pays a price for every move he makes." Rowan considered this. "All right, Eli starts keeping records. The rest of us fortify defenses. And Marin, you need to write down everything you know about Crow's operation. Names, routes, buyers, everything." Marin nodded, though the thought of putting that information on paper made her skin crawl. Once it existed in writing, it became real, dangerous, the kind of thing that got people killed. But maybe that was the point. Maybe it was time to stop running from the truth and start weaponizing it instead. The brothers dispersed to handle morning chores. Marin stayed in the kitchen, staring at the blank piece of paper Rowan had given her. She picked up a pen and began to write. 3 days later, a wagon showed up at the ranch carrying supplies the Calders hadn't ordered. The driver was a nervous man named Pete, who worked for the feed store in Dust Halo. "I'm supposed to deliver this to you," Pete said, glancing around like he expected armed men to appear from the sagebrush. "We didn't order anything," Rowan said. "I know, but someone paid for it. Left cash at the store with instructions to bring you flour, coffee, salt, and ammunition. Didn't leave a name." "Who paid?" "Like I said, didn't leave a name. Just cash and instructions." The brothers unloaded the supplies while Pete fled back to town as fast as his horses would carry him. Rowan stood staring at the mysterious delivery like it might explode. "It's a trap," Levi said. "Poison, probably, or they're going to claim we stole it." But Marin was already checking the flour sacks, running the white powder between her fingers, tasting a pinch. "It's clean. Real flour, not poisoned or cut with anything." "Then what's the angle?" "Maybe there isn't one," Eli suggested. "Maybe someone in town is trying to help without getting caught." It was possible. Marin had noticed that not everyone in Dust Halo believed the rumors spreading about the Calders. A few shopkeepers still nodded to her on the street. The doctor's wife had smiled at her last week. Dutch at the saloon had warned Jace that Carson Briggs was asking questions about the ranch. Maybe there were allies out there, too scared of Crow to act openly, but willing to help in small secret ways. "We accept it," Rowan decided, "but we stay cautious." Over the next week, more anonymous help arrived. Someone repaired the fence line along the eastern boundary without being asked. A cord of firewood appeared stacked near the barn. A bag of medical supplies showed up on the porch with a note that said only, "For injuries." It gave Marin hope that maybe they weren't as isolated as Crow wanted them to believe. But then Jace came home from town with his face beaten to a pulp and his knuckles split open. He'd gotten into a fight at the saloon with 3 of Crow's hired men. They'd made comments about Marin, the kind of crude suggestions that stopped being words and became violence. Jace had put 2 of them in the dirt before the 3rd one pulled a knife. Dutch had broken up the fight before anyone got killed, but the damage was done. Now there was blood between the Calders and Crow's operation, and blood had a way of demanding more blood. Marin cleaned Jace's wounds while he sat silent and furious in the kitchen. The cut along his ribs was deep enough to need stitching. She threaded a needle, heated it over a lamp flame, and went to work. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "Good." She pierced the skin and began pulling the wound closed. Jace didn't flinch, just stared at the wall with his jaw clenched. "You can't keep doing this," Marin said quietly. "Doing what?" "Fighting every bastard who says something ugly about me. I've been hearing ugly things my whole life. I don't need you breaking your hands over it." "Yeah, well, maybe I need to break my hands over it." Marin tied off another stitch. "Why?" Jace finally looked at her. "Because when Ma died, we all just fell apart. Rowan tried to hold everything together, but the rest of us, we were drowning. Then you showed up and fixed things without us even asking. You made this place feel like home again. So yeah, when some hired thug talks about you like you're nothing, I'm going to put my fist through his face. That's stupid." "Probably, but it's the truth." Marin finished the stitching and wrapped his ribs in clean bandages. "Next time you want to defend my honor, try not getting stabbed." "I'll do my best." That night, Rowan called a family meeting in the main room. Everyone gathered around the table while he spread out the ledger books and the notes Eli had been keeping. "We need to talk about what happens next," Rowan said. "Crow's escalating. The dead cattle was a warning. What happened to Jace was a challenge. He's pushing us to respond with force so he can justify coming at us with everything he's got." "So we don't give him the satisfaction," Marin said. "Agreed. But we also can't just sit here waiting to get picked apart piece by piece, so I'm proposing something risky." He pulled out a map of the Sangre Flats region. Several ranches were marked in pencil, including the Calder property and Crow's massive holding to the west. "Crow's been targeting other ranches too," Rowan continued. "The Morrison place lost half their herd to rustlers last month. The Hendricks family got burned out 2 weeks ago. The widow who runs the Triple R has been getting threats. Crow's trying to seize control of the entire region, not just our land." "So what are you suggesting?" Levi asked. "We organize. Talk to the other ranchers, see if we can form an alliance. If we stand together, Crow can't pick us off one by one." Jace shook his head. "Nobody's going to help us. They're all too scared." "Maybe, but we have to try." Marin studied the map. her mind racing. It could work, but we'd need leverage, something that makes helping us worth the risk. Like what? Like proof that Crow's operation is bigger than land grabbing. If we can show that he's involved in weapons smuggling, murder, bribery, crimes that bring federal attention, then fighting him becomes less dangerous than ignoring him. Rowan looked at her sharply. You said you'd write down what you know about his operation. I did. Marin pulled out several pages covered in her careful handwriting. Names, dates, routes he used for smuggling weapons, locations where murders happened, officials he bribed. It's not complete, but it's enough to start building a case. That's evidence that could get him hanged, Levi said, which is exactly why he wants me dead. The room went quiet. Finally, Eli spoke up. We make copies, distribute them to people we trust. That way, if something happens to the original, the information still exists. And if someone we trust betrays us? Jace asked. Then we're screwed anyway, Noah replied. Might as well take the chance. Rowan made the decision. All right, we make copies, we reach out to the other ranchers, and we start building a coalition. But we do it quietly. No big announcements, no public meetings, just careful conversations with people who have as much to lose as we do. Over the next 2 weeks, the brothers made contact with neighboring ranchers. Some slammed doors in their faces. Others listened but refused to commit. A few were willing to stand together. The Morrison Ranch agreed to coordinate defenses. The Triple R widow offered to share information about Crow's movements. A family named Chen, who ran sheep on the southern flats, provided maps of hidden trails through the canyons. It wasn't much, but it was something. Meanwhile, Marin taught the brothers everything she knew about survival in hostile territory. How to move at night without being seen. How to cache supplies in case the house burned. How to communicate using signals that looked like ordinary ranch activity. She was turning them into something more than ranchers. She was turning them into resistance fighters. And late at night, when she couldn't sleep, she wondered if she was saving them or destroying them. The answer came during the blizzard. The storm rolled in from the north like the end of the world, a wall of white that swallowed the sky and dropped temperatures so low that exposed skin froze in minutes. The brothers had seen bad winters before, but this was different. This was biblical. They brought all the livestock as close to the ranch as possible, packed the house with supplies, and prepared to wait it out. The wind howled like wounded animals. Snow piled against the windows until the world outside disappeared completely. They were trapped, and that's when Crow attacked. Marin saw them first, dark shapes moving through the whiteout, barely visible against the snow. She'd been watching from the upstairs window, unable to sleep, when movement caught her eye. We've got company, she called down to the others. The brothers grabbed weapons and took positions throughout the house. Rowan killed most of the lamps, leaving just enough light to see by. They waited in tense silence. The first gunshot shattered a downstairs window. Hold your fire, Rowan ordered. Don't waste ammunition shooting at shadows. More shots followed, coming from multiple directions. The attackers were surrounding the house, using the blizzard as cover. Marin counted muzzle flashes, at least 8 men, maybe more. They're trying to pin us down, she said. Keep us inside while they set up for something bigger. Like what? Eli asked, his voice shaking. The answer came in the form of fire. Someone had doused the barn in kerosene and set it ablaze. The flames fought against the wind and snow, barely visible through the storm, but unmistakable. The barn held most of their winter feed, their tools, and 3 horses that had been too sick to move. We have to put it out, Noah said. That's what they want, Levi replied. The moment we leave the house, they'll cut us down. But the barn kept burning, and the screaming of trapped horses cut through the wind. Jay stood up. I'm going. You're injured, Marin protested. Those horses are dying because of me, because I started a fight in town. I'm going. Before anyone could stop him, he was out the door and running through the blizzard toward the barn. Gunfire erupted immediately, muzzle flashes lighting up the storm. Jace zigzagged through the snow, moving like a man who'd already accepted he might die. Cover him, Rowan shouted. The brothers started returning fire, shooting at anything that moved in the white chaos. Marin grabbed her rifle and took position at a broken window, sighting down targets she could barely see. Through the snow, she watched Jace reach the barn and disappear inside. Seconds later, 3 horses bolted out into the storm, freed from the burning building. Jace followed, but he was moving slower now, limping. Then a figure emerged from the blizzard behind him, one of Crow's men, knife drawn, closing in for the kill. Marin didn't think. She just fired. The shot was pure instinct, muscle memory from hours of practice with Jace. The attacker went down in the snow and didn't get up. She'd killed a man. The thought should have made her sick, should have made her drop the rifle and collapse. But all she felt was cold calculation. One enemy down. How many left to go? Jace made it back to the house, blood mixing with snow on his clothes. Levi pulled him inside and slammed the door. "You're hit," Marin said. "Grazed. I'm fine." He wasn't fine. The bullet had torn through his shoulder and he was losing blood fast. But there was no time to treat it properly because the real attack was just beginning. Someone had set the main house on fire. Smoke started pouring through the floorboards from the cellar. Crow's men had gotten underneath the house somehow, probably through the old root cellar entrance, and set fires in the foundation. "We need to evacuate," Rowan said. "Now!" But evacuating meant going into the blizzard, into the teeth of the ambush waiting outside. They'd be sitting targets. "Wait," Marin said. "They expect us to run out the front, so we go out the back through the kitchen. Use the smokehouse and storage shed for cover. Fight our way to the barn foundation. It's stone, won't burn. We can defend that position." "That's 50 yards of open ground," Levi said. "You got a better idea?" They didn't. Rowan made the call. "Everyone grabs emergency packs. We move fast, stay low, and we do not separate. If someone goes down, we carry them. Nobody gets left behind." The brothers grabbed the supply packs they'd prepared weeks ago at Marin's insistence. Everything they needed to survive for 3 days. Food, water, ammunition, medical supplies, blankets. It was those preparations that would save them now. They moved through the burning house in single file, smoke choking them, heat searing their skin. The kitchen was already engulfed. They'd have to go through the storage room and out the back window. Rowan went first, then Eli, then the twins, then Jace, then Levi. Marin went last, pausing at the window to look back at the house they'd fought so hard to protect. It was being swallowed by flames and snow simultaneously, fire and ice locked in mortal combat. Then she jumped. The blizzard hit her like a hammer. Wind tore at her clothes. Snow blinded her. Cold sank into her bones. She could barely see the others ahead of her, dark shapes stumbling through white chaos. Gunfire erupted from somewhere to the left. Someone screamed? She couldn't tell who. They kept moving toward the barn foundation, toward whatever cover they could find. Something burned past Marin's face, a bullet, so close she felt the heat of it. She fired back blindly and kept running. Then she saw Rowan go down. He'd been in the lead, guiding everyone toward safety, when part of the burning house collapsed behind them. A timber beam, massive and burning, fell directly into his path. He tried to dodge but wasn't fast enough. The beam caught him across the back and drove him into the snow. Marin reached him first. The beam was too heavy to lift alone, and it was still burning, melting snow and flesh where it touched him. Rowan's face was twisted in agony, but he wasn't screaming, just breathing in short, desperate gasps. "Get it off him!" Eli shouted, appearing through the storm. Together, they lifted the burning timber just enough for Rowan to drag himself free. His back was charred. His shirt melted into the wound. He should have been unconscious from the pain, but somehow he was still moving. "Leave me," Rowan gasped. "Get to cover." "Not a chance," Marin said. She and Eli hauled him upright, one arm over each of their shoulders, and kept moving. The barn foundation was close now. She could see the stone wall emerging from the snow like a fortress. The twins reached it first and immediately started returning fire, providing cover. Levi was already there, setting up a defensive position. Jace collapsed against the wall, breathing hard, blood still seeping from his shoulder. They'd made it. But the house was gone, swallowed by fire. Everything they'd owned, everything the brothers' mother had left them, was being reduced to ash and memory. And the attackers were still out there, circling like wolves. Marin lowered Rowan against the stone wall and checked his wounds. The burns were bad, 3rd degree across most of his back. Without proper treatment, infection would kill him in days, but that assumed they survived the next few hours. "How many are we facing?" Rowan asked through gritted teeth. Levi had been counting. "I saw at least 6 distinct shooters, could be more using the storm for cover. And we're pinned down with limited ammunition," Noah added. "So what do we do?" Silas asked. Everyone looked at Marin. She realized with something like horror that they were waiting for her to have the answer. Not Rowan, who was their leader. Not Levi, who was the most tactical. Her. Because she'd survived situations like this before. Because she knew how cruel men operated. "We wait," Marin said finally. "The storm's our ally now. They can't see us any better than we can see them. And they're not going to wait out here all night in this cold. Eventually, they'll either have to assault our position directly or retreat. And if they assault, then we make them pay for every inch of ground." They settled in to wait, huddled against the stone foundation while the blizzard raged around them. Marin used the medical supplies from the emergency packs to treat wounds as best she could in the dark. Rowan's burns got covered in clean bandages soaked in snow to keep them cool. Jace's shoulder wound got stitched again, though the earlier stitches had torn open during the fight. The twins took first watch while the others tried to stay warm. But it was impossible. The cold was invasive, relentless, deadly. If they stayed out here too long, hypothermia would kill them faster than crow's bullets. "We can't stay here," Levi said after an hour. "We'll freeze." "The mining tunnels," Eli said suddenly. "The old silver mine about 2 miles east. It's abandoned but still intact. We could shelter there." "2 miles in a blizzard?" Jace said. "We'll die before we get halfway." "We'll die if we stay here," Eli countered. Marin considered it. The Chen family had mentioned those tunnels when they'd shared their maps. The entrance was hidden in a canyon, hard to find if you didn't know where to look. If they could reach it, they'd have shelter from the storm and a defensible position. But Rowan was badly injured. Jace could barely walk. And Crow's men were still out there somewhere. "We go," Rowan decided, his voice weak but firm. "If we stay, we're dead. At least moving gives us a chance." They gathered what supplies they could carry and prepared to move. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it was getting worse. Visibility was maybe 10 feet now, the wind screaming like something alive and angry. "Stay together," Marin ordered. "We lose someone in this storm, we'll never find them again." They moved out in a tight group. Marin in the lead with the compass Levi had grabbed from the emergency supplies. 2 miles east, through terrain she'd never traveled, in the middle of a blizzard, with injured men and killers hunting them. The odds were not good, but the odds had never been good, and somehow they kept surviving anyway. The journey through the blizzard became a waking nightmare within the first 100 yards. The wind didn't just blow, it attacked, slamming into them from different directions like it was trying to knock them down and bury them under snow. Marin kept checking the compass, but her hands were so numb she could barely feel the metal casing. Every few minutes she'd cup it close to her face, squinting through the darkness to make sure they were still heading east. Behind her, the brothers struggled forward in a ragged line. Rowan leaned heavily on Eli, his burned back making every step agony. Jace stumbled along with one hand pressed against his bleeding shoulder. The twins took turns breaking trail through the deepening drifts. Levi brought up the rear, constantly looking back to make sure they weren't being followed. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, Noah collapsed. He went down without warning, just dropped face first into the snow, and didn't get up. Silas was on him immediately, rolling his twin over, shouting his name into the wind. "He's breathing," Silas yelled, "but he's out cold." Hypothermia. Marin had seen it before on the cattle trails. The body just gave up, decided warmth was impossible, and started shutting down to conserve what little heat remained. "We need to keep moving," Levi said. "We can't stop here." "He can't walk," Silas shot back. "Then we carry him." Silas and Levi hauled Noah upright, one arm over each of their shoulders, and the group pushed forward. But they were moving even slower now, burning energy they didn't have, losing body heat with every passing minute. Marin's mind started playing tricks on her. She'd see shapes in the snow that looked like buildings or trees, only to reach them and find nothing but more emptiness. The cold was getting inside her head, making her thoughts sluggish and confused. She almost walked right past the canyon entrance. It was Eli who spotted it, a dark slash in the white landscape barely visible through the storm. "There," he shouted, "that's got to be it." They stumbled down a steep embankment into the canyon, using each other for balance, half falling, half sliding through the snow. The walls rose on either side of them, cutting the wind enough that Marin could finally hear herself think. The mine entrance was another 50 yards into the canyon, hidden behind a collapsed section of rock face. If you didn't know where to look, you'd walk right past it. The Chen family's directions had been perfect. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through sideways, but it opened into a larger tunnel beyond. Marin went in first, rifle raised, expecting bats or snakes or worse. But the tunnel was empty and dry, stretching back into darkness. "Get everyone inside," she ordered. One by one, the brothers shuffled into the mine. Rowan barely made it before his legs gave out. Noah was still unconscious. Jace sat down against the tunnel wall and just stared at nothing, eyes glassy with pain and exhaustion. "We need fire," Marin said. "Now." They had matches in the emergency packs, but finding fuel was harder. The mine had been abandoned for decades, stripped of anything useful. Finally, Levi discovered some old timber supports deeper in the tunnel, dry wood that would burn. Getting a fire started with frozen hands took forever. Marin went through 8 matches before one finally caught, the tiny flame looking impossibly fragile against all that darkness. But it held, and slowly, painfully, they built it into something that produced actual heat. The change was immediate. Feeling started returning to Marin's fingers and toes, bringing with it the stabbing pain of frostbite. Around the fire, the brothers were experiencing the same thing, grimacing, cursing, trying not to cry out as blood flow returned to frozen extremities. Noah woke up confused and shivering violently. Silas wrapped him in every blanket they had and held him close, using body heat to warm him faster. Marin checked Rowan's back. The bandages were frozen to his skin, and removing them would tear open the wounds again. She left them in place for now, just made sure he was as comfortable as possible, and gave him water from her canteen. "How bad is it?" Rowan asked. "Bad enough, but you're tough. You'll make it." "Don't lie to me, Marin." She met his eyes. "Without proper medical treatment, you've got maybe 3 days before infection sets in. Less if we can't keep the wounds clean. So we need to get to Dust Halo. Find the doctor." "In this storm? We'd die before we made it halfway." "Then what do we do?" Marin didn't have an answer. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind howl outside the mine entrance. The fire crackled and popped, throwing dancing shadows against the tunnel walls. It should have felt safe in here, sheltered from the storm and hidden from their enemies. But Marin couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just traded one trap for another. Eli pulled out his journal and started writing by firelight. His hands were shaking so badly, the words came out barely legible, but he kept at it. "What are you doing?" Jace asked. "Recording what happened, dates, times, who attacked us. If we die down here, maybe someone will find this and know the truth." "We're not going to die down here," Levi said, but his voice lacked conviction. "How do you know?" "Because we've survived everything else. Why would this be different?" Eli looked at his oldest brother, really looked at him, and said the thing everyone else was thinking but too scared to voice. "Because we're running out of luck. Because Crow's not going to stop. Because even if we survive the storm, we've got nothing left. The house is gone. The cattle are scattered or dead. Our supplies are destroyed. What exactly are we surviving for?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Rowan spoke up, his voice rough with pain. "We're surviving for each other. That's what families do. They survive the impossible and keep going anyway." "Ma's gone, Rowan. The ranch is gone. We're huddled in a freezing mine shaft waiting to die. At what point do we admit that maybe survival isn't enough anymore?" "When we're dead," Jace said flatly. "That's when we admit it. Not before." Eli slammed his journal shut. "You don't get it. Any of you. This isn't some adventure story where the heroes win because they're brave and good. This is real life, and in real life, people like us lose. People like Crow win. That's how the world works." "Then we change how the world works," Marin said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "We've been playing defense this whole time," she continued, "waiting for Crow to make his moves, then reacting. But what if we stop reacting and start attacking?" "With what?" Levi demanded. "We've got 6 people, limited ammunition, and 2 of us can barely walk." "We've got something better than that. We've got information. We've got evidence of Crow's crimes going back years. We've got the names of everyone he's bribed, every law he's broken, every person he's killed. That's a weapon. A weapon we can't use while we're trapped in a mine," Jace pointed out. "No, but we can use it once this storm passes. We take everything we know and we spread it. Not just to territorial authorities, to everyone. Every newspaper in the territory, every federal marshal, every rival land baron who wants to see Crow destroyed. We make him so toxic that even his allies abandon him. Rowan considered this. That's a long game. Takes time we might not have. So we buy time. We hit his operation where it hurts, force him to defend instead of attack. How? Marin pulled out the notes she'd written about Crow's smuggling routes. He's got supply depots scattered across the territory. Weapons, ammunition, goods he's moving illegally. If we destroy those, we cut off his resources and make him vulnerable. That's guerrilla warfare, Levi said. That's terrorism. That's survival, Marin corrected. And it's justice for everyone he's destroyed. The brothers debated long into the night. Some agreed with Marin's plan. Others thought it was too dangerous, too likely to get them all killed. But eventually, exhaustion won out over argument, and they settled in to sleep. Marin took first watch, sitting near the mine entrance, with her rifle across her lap. The storm was still raging outside, showing no signs of letting up. Snow had drifted across the entrance, half blocking it, creating a natural insulation that kept the tunnel warmer. She thought about everything that had led her to this moment. The choices she'd made, the people she'd lost, the miles she'd run trying to escape a past that kept catching up to her anyway. For years, she'd believed that staying alone was the only way to stay safe, that caring about people made you vulnerable, that love was just another word for weakness. But sitting in that mine shaft, surrounded by 6 brothers who'd chosen to fight beside her instead of abandoning her, Marin realized something that should have been obvious all along. Being alone hadn't kept her safe. It had just kept her alive. There was a difference. Around 3 in the morning, Rowan woke up delirious with fever. The infection was setting in faster than Marin had anticipated. His burns were getting worse, the flesh around them red and swollen. She gave him water and tried to keep him cool, but there wasn't much else she could do. They needed real medicine, real treatment, and they needed it soon. The storm's got to break eventually, Levi said, appearing beside her. When it does, I'll ride for Dust Halo. Bring back the doctor. Crow's men will be watching the town. Then I'll be careful. You'll be dead. Levi was quiet for a moment. You know what I hated most about you when you first showed up? You looked at us like we were already broken, like we were just waiting for someone to come along and fix us. That's not... Let me finish. I hated it because it was true. We were broken. Are broken, probably. But you didn't fix us by being some perfect savior. You fixed us by being just as broken as we were, and showing us that broken people can still function if they hold each other up. I'm not sure hold each other up is the right phrase for our current situation. Maybe not. But we're still here, aren't we? Still fighting. That's got to count for something. Marin didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. The storm finally broke around dawn on the 3rd day. 1 minute the wind was screaming through the canyon, and the next it was just gone. Silence rushed in to fill the space, so sudden and complete that it felt wrong. Marin stepped outside and saw a world transformed. Snow covered everything in smooth, white drifts that looked almost peaceful. The sky was clearing, showing patches of blue between retreating clouds. The temperature was still brutally cold, but without the wind, it felt manageable. We need to move, she said, before Crow's men find this place. They gathered what supplies they had left and prepared to travel. Noah could walk again, though he was weak. Rowan couldn't. He needed to be carried on a makeshift stretcher they built from timber supports and blankets. The journey back toward Dust Halo took most of the day. They couldn't go to the ranch. It was burned and probably being watched. Instead, Marin led them to an abandoned homestead about 5 miles south of town that she'd scouted weeks earlier. The building was barely standing, but it had 4 walls and part of a roof, which was more than they'd had in the mine. They got Rowan inside and made him as comfortable as possible. I'm going into town, Levi announced. The hell you are, Jay said. You'll get killed. Rowan's dying. We need medicine, supplies, and information about what Crow's doing. Someone has to go. Then I'll go. You're injured. So are you. They would have kept arguing, but Marin interrupted. I'm going alone. That's the worst idea I've heard today, Levi said. No, it's the smartest. Crow's men are looking for all of us together. One woman moving alone won't draw as much attention. Plus, I know how to disappear in a crowd. You all stand out like sore thumbs. She's right, Eli said. Marin's got a better chance of getting in and out without being noticed. The brothers didn't like it, but they couldn't argue with the logic. Marin changed into the cleanest clothes they had, hid her rifle under a long coat, and prepared to enter the town that might already be looking for her corpse. "If I'm not back by tomorrow morning, don't come looking for me," she said. "Head east to the Chen Ranch and tell them what happened." "We're not abandoning you," Rowan said weakly from his stretcher. "You're not. You're surviving. That's what I need you to do." She left before anyone could argue further. The walk into Dust Halo took 2 hours through knee-deep snow. Marin approached from the east, avoiding the main road, staying in the tree line until the last possible moment. The town looked normal enough from a distance. Smoke rising from chimneys, people moving between buildings, life continuing despite the storm. But when she got closer, she saw the changes. Armed men stood at strategic points throughout town. Not locals. Hired guns brought in from somewhere else. They were watching the roads, the saloon, the general store, looking for someone, looking for her. Marin pulled her coat tighter and walked into town like she owned the place. Confidence was a disguise that worked better than any costume. If she acted like she belonged, most people wouldn't look twice. She made it 3 blocks before someone recognized her. "That's her, right?" a voice called out. "That's the Calder woman." Marin ran. She ducked between buildings, vaulted a fence, cut through an alley that stank of garbage and horses. Behind her, she could hear shouting, boots pounding through snow, the metallic click of rifles being cocked. She burst out onto a side street and nearly collided with Dutch, the bartender. He grabbed her arm, and for a second Marin thought he was going to turn her in. Instead, he pulled her into the saloon through the back door. "Upstairs," he hissed. "Storage room. Don't make a sound." Marin ran up the stairs and found the storage room, barely bigger than a closet, filled with crates of liquor and supplies. She wedged herself between 2 barrels and waited. Below, she could hear men entering the saloon. Heavy boots on wooden floors, aggressive voices demanding to know if Dutch had seen anyone. "Place has been empty all morning," Dutch said. "Storm kept everyone home. We got a report someone matching her description was seen heading this way." "Well, she ain't here. You're welcome to look around if you don't believe me." There was a pause. Then footsteps moving through the saloon, searching. Marin held her breath, rifle ready. If they found her, she'd go down fighting. But they didn't search upstairs. After a few minutes, the footsteps retreated and the saloon door slammed shut. Marin waited another 20 minutes before moving. When she finally emerged from the storage room, Dutch was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. "You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the dumbest," he said. "Can't it be both?" "What are you doing here? Whole town thinks you and the Calders died in that fire." "Rowan's alive, but hurt bad. We need medicine, and I need to know what's happening in town." Dutch poured 2 whiskeys and slid one across the bar to her. "What's happening is that Vernon Crow has declared himself the law around here. Sheriff's either dead or run off. Nobody's seen him since the storm. Crow's men are everywhere, and anyone who speaks against him tends to disappear." "What about our ranch?" "Burned to the foundation. Crow's already claimed the land for unpaid debts. Says you all died in the fire and he's just taking what he's legally owed." Marin downed the whiskey in one burning gulp. "He's got to be stopped." "Yeah? You in what army?" "The people in this town who are tired of being terrorized." Dutch laughed, a bitter, empty sound. "You think folks here are going to stand up to Crow?" "They're scared, Marin, and scared people don't fight back. They just try to survive." "Then we make them more scared of what happens if they don't fight. Show them that Crow's not invincible." "How?" Marin pulled out the notes she'd been carrying, the evidence of Crow's crimes, the names, the dates, the routes. "We expose him. Everything he's done, everyone he's hurt, every law he's broken. We make it public. Force the territory to acknowledge what he is." Dutch studied the papers. "This gets out, Crow will kill you." "He's already trying to kill me. Might as well make it worth his while." For the first time since she'd known him, Dutch smiled. "You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the dumbest. Still, can't it be both?" He reached under the bar and pulled out a small bag. "Medicine for burns, bandages, laudanum for pain. Doctor left it here before he disappeared. Figured someone would need it eventually." "Why are you helping me?" "Because I'm tired of being scared. Because my wife died 5 years ago, and I've got nothing left to lose. And because someone's got to stand up to bastards like Crow, or this whole territory turns into hell." Marin took the supplies. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Getting back out of town's going to be harder than getting in. Crow's men are watching every road. Then I won't use the roads. She left through the saloon cellar, which connected to a network of old storage tunnels dug during the town's mining days. Dutch had maps. He'd been planning his own escape route, apparently, in case things got bad enough to warrant running. The tunnels were dark and cramped and smelled like rot, but they led outside town without Marin having to expose herself to the searching guards. She emerged from a ventilation shaft near the old cemetery, brushed herself off, and started the long walk back to the abandoned homestead. She made it halfway before she realized she was being followed. The tracks in the snow were obvious once she knew to look for them. Someone had been trailing her since she left the tunnels. One person, judging by the footprints. Moving carefully, staying back far enough to avoid being seen directly. Marin kept walking like she hadn't noticed, but her hand drifted to the rifle under her coat. Whoever was following her would make their move eventually. She just needed to be ready when they did. The attack came at the creek crossing. Marin was halfway across, stepping carefully on ice-covered stones, when a voice called out behind her. "Stop right there." She turned to find Carson Briggs standing on the bank, rifle aimed at her chest. The man who'd recognized her in town weeks ago. The man who'd probably told Crow where she was. "Been looking for you," Briggs said. "Figured you'd show up in town eventually. Desperate people always do." "What do you want, Carson?" "What I want is the bounty Crow's offering for you, dead or alive, though dead's probably easier." "You always were a lazy bastard," Briggs grinned, revealing those yellow teeth. "Ain't about lazy, it's about smart. You're worth $500 to me dead. Alive, I gotta drag you back to Crow and listen to you talk the whole way. This is simpler." "Then shoot me and get it over with." "Oh, I will, but first, I'm curious about something. Your husband, did he really try to run from Crow's operation? Or did you kill him yourself?" The accusation hit Marin like a physical blow. "I didn't kill him." "No? Because I heard different. Heard maybe you got tired of being married to a smuggler. Heard maybe you decided to solve that problem permanently and then ran before anyone could prove it." "You heard wrong. Maybe. Maybe not. Either way, you're about to join him." Briggs's finger tightened on the trigger. Marin dove sideways into the creek just as the rifle fired. The bullet passed through the space where her head had been a second earlier and cracked into the ice beyond. Freezing water closed over her, so cold it felt like being stabbed with 1,000 knives. She came up gasping, rifle soaked and useless, and scrambled toward the opposite bank. Briggs was already reloading, taking his time because he thought she was helpless. He didn't know about the knife in her boot. Marin pulled it free as she climbed out of the creek, her movements clumsy from cold. Briggs raised his rifle for a second shot. She threw the knife. The blade wasn't balanced for throwing. The throw was desperate and awkward and should have missed completely. But sometimes the universe made exceptions. The knife caught Briggs in the throat, right below his Adam's apple. He made a wet, gurgling sound and dropped the rifle. His hands went to his neck, trying to stop the blood that was pouring out between his fingers. Marin stood dripping and freezing on the creek bank, watching him die. It took longer than she expected. He fell to his knees first, then onto his side, then stopped moving altogether. The snow around him turned red. She'd killed before. During the blizzard attack, she'd shot one of Crow's men. But that had been in the chaos of battle, barely visible through the storm. This was different. This was watching a man bleed out in front of her while she did nothing to help. This was choosing to let him die. Marin told herself he would have killed her. Told herself it was self-defense. Told herself it didn't matter because men like Briggs were going to die violently eventually anyway. But her hands were shaking as she retrieved her knife, and it wasn't from the cold. She searched his body and found the money Crow had given him as an advance on the bounty, $75 in cash. She took it. Took his rifle and ammunition too. Took his coat because hers was soaked through and she'd freeze without a replacement. Then she dragged his body into the creek and watched the current take it downstream. By the time she reached the abandoned homestead, Marin was operating on pure willpower. Her wet clothes had frozen to her skin. Her fingers and toes were numb again. Her thoughts kept drifting to warm places, real beds, hot food, safety that didn't require constant vigilance. But when she stumbled through the door and saw Rowan still alive on his makeshift stretcher, still breathing despite the fever that racked his body, she remembered why staying conscious mattered. "I've got medicine," she said, her voice coming out slurred from cold. The brothers swarmed her, pulling off her frozen coat, wrapping her in blankets, starting a fire. Eli took the supplies she'd brought and immediately started treating Rowan's wounds with the medicine Dutch had provided. "What happened to you?" Levi demanded, looking at the bruises forming on her face from hitting the creek rocks. "Ran into Carson Briggs. Had a disagreement. He lost." "Is he dead?" "And before you ask, it was him or me." Levi nodded, accepting this without judgment. Out here, survival trumped morality. Over the next few hours, they worked to stabilize Rowan. The medicine helped bring his fever down, and cleaning the wounds properly made a huge difference. He was still in bad shape, but he wasn't actively dying anymore. Marin told them everything she'd learned in Dust Halo, about Crow taking over the town, about the sheriff disappearing, about people being too scared to resist. "So what do we do?" Jace asked. "We give them something to hope for, show them that Crow can be beaten." "How?" Marin spread out the map of the territory that the Chen family had provided. Several locations were marked, properties Crow owned, operations he ran, supply depots that fed his organization. "We hit him where it hurts," she said. "Here." She pointed to a warehouse outside town. "This is where he stores ammunition and supplies for his hired guns. We burn it down." "That's suicide," Noah said. "Place is probably guarded." "Probably. But if we succeed, we cut off his resources and prove he's vulnerable. If we fail, we're not worse off than we already are." The brothers looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that families develop over years of shared history. Finally, Rowan spoke up from his stretcher. "Do it. Show them we're not dead yet." "You should rest," Marin said. "I've been resting for 3 days. I'm done resting. Even if I can't fight, I can plan." So they planned. The warehouse sat 3 miles northwest of Dust Halo, a squat wooden structure that looked ordinary enough from a distance. But Marin had spent 2 days watching it through a spyglass borrowed from the Chen family, and she'd learned its patterns. 6 guards rotated in 8-hour shifts. Supply wagons arrived every Tuesday and Friday. The building had only 2 entrances, front and back, and both were visible from the guard posts. It was designed to be impregnable, which meant they'd have to get creative. "The weak point is the roof," Levi said, studying the sketches Marin had made. "Wood shingles, probably dry as hell. One good fire and the whole thing goes up." "How do we get on the roof without being seen?" Eli asked. "We don't. We create a distraction that pulls the guards away, then move fast." Jace was cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time that hour, a nervous habit he'd developed since getting stabbed. "What kind of distraction?" "The kind that makes them think the real attack is coming from somewhere else," Marin said. "We stage something loud and obvious at the front entrance. While they're dealing with that, 2 of us go over the back wall and onto the roof." "That's a lot of things that have to go right," Noah pointed out. "Yeah, but it only takes one thing going wrong to bring down Crow's entire supply operation. The odds are worth it." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Marin and Levi would be the ones going on to the roof. She was small enough to move quietly, and Levi had the best head for tactics if something went sideways. Jason the twins would create the distraction at the front. Eli would stay back with Rowan, ready to provide covering fire if needed. It wasn't a great plan. But great plans required resources they didn't have. They moved out 2 hours before midnight, traveling on foot to avoid the noise of horses. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. Marin's breath came out in white clouds that she tried to minimize, breathing shallow and slow. As they approached the warehouse, Jace and the twins split off to circle around front. Marin and Levi continued toward the back wall, moving through scrub brush that provided minimal cover. "You ever done anything like this before?" Levi whispered. "Burned down a warehouse?" "Attacked a fortified position with no backup and no escape plan. Once or twice, usually didn't end well." "That's encouraging." They reached the back wall and crouched in the shadows, waiting for the distraction. Marin counted seconds in her head, trying to time it right. If Jace moved too early, the guards would be alert when she and Levi made their approach. Too late, and they'd lose the cover of darkness. The explosion came right on schedule. It wasn't a real explosion, just a barrel of lamp oil that Jace had rigged to go up with enough flash and noise to look like something serious. But from inside the warehouse, it would sound like the world ending. Immediately, shouts erupted from the guard posts. Marin heard boots running, orders being shouted, the metallic sound of rifles being readied. The distraction was working. "Go," Levi hissed. They ran for the back wall, keeping low. Marin hit it first and boosted herself up, fingers finding purchase on the rough wood. She pulled herself to the top and reached down to help Levi. Together they scrambled onto the roof and lay flat against the shingles. From up here, Marin could see the chaos at the front entrance, as the barrel was still burning, throwing wild shadows across the ground. The guards were focused entirely on it, trying to determine if it was an attack or an accident. "We've got maybe 3 minutes before they figure out it's a diversion," Levi said. They moved across the roof toward the ventilation shaft Marin had spotted during her surveillance. It was just wide enough to drop a burning cloth through. Not enough to start a massive fire immediately, but enough to get one going if it landed on the right materials. Marin had prepared 3 cloth bundles soaked in lamp oil, wrapped around rocks for weight. Levi lit the first one with a match, and Marin dropped it down the shaft. They waited, counting seconds. Nothing happened. "Maybe it went out," Levi said. "Give it a minute." They lit and dropped the second bundle, then the third, and still nothing. Below them, the guards were starting to calm down. Someone was shouting that it was just an oil barrel, not an attack. Any second now, they'd spread out to check the perimeter and spot Marin and Levi on the roof. "We need to go," Levi whispered urgently. But Marin was staring at the ventilation shaft, thinking. The bundles must have landed on stone or dirt instead of combustible material. They needed to get fire directly onto the stored ammunition and supplies, which meant someone had to go inside. "Cover me," Marin said. "What are you—" But she was already moving, scrambling toward the edge of the roof where a second-story window looked dark and possibly unlocked. It was insane, suicidal even, but they'd come too far to fail because of bad luck. The window was latched from inside, but the latch was old and loose. Marin worked her knife blade into the gap and jimmied it open. The window swung inward with a creak that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet night. She dropped through into darkness. The room was some kind of office, desk, filing cabinets, papers scattered everywhere. Marin felt her way to the door and eased it open. Beyond was a catwalk overlooking the main warehouse floor, which was stacked with crates and barrels. Perfect. She pulled out her last oil-soaked cloth, lit it with a match, and threw it down onto the nearest stack of crates. This time, the fire caught immediately. Flames spread across the crates like they'd been waiting for permission, racing through dried wood and combustible materials with terrifying speed. Within seconds, the entire stack was burning. Then the fire jumped to the next stack, and the next. Marin ran back to the window, but voices were already shouting below. Someone had seen the flames. Guards were rushing inside. Any second now, they'd see her on the catwalk. She dove through the window just as gunfire erupted behind her. Bullets punched through the wall, spraying splinters. Marin hit the roof hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs, rolled, and kept moving. Levi grabbed her arm and hauled her toward the back edge of the roof. Below, the warehouse was fully engulfed now, flames visible through every window. Black smoke poured into the sky. "Jump!" Levi shouted. They leaped off the roof together, hit the ground rolling, and came up running. Behind them, the warehouse groaned and began to collapse. Ammunition started cooking off inside, sending bullets flying in random directions like deadly fireworks. Marin and Levi didn't stop running until they reached the extraction point where Eli was waiting with the horses. They mounted up and rode hard for the abandoned homestead, not looking back at the pillar of fire lighting up the night sky. By the time they reached safety, Jace and the twins were already there, breathing hard but grinning like fools. "Did you see that thing go up?" Noah said. "Must have burned for miles." "Half the territory probably saw it," Silas added. Rowan was sitting up on his stretcher, looking stronger than he had in days. "You actually did it." "We got lucky," Marin said, still shaking from adrenaline. "If that window had been locked, or if the fire hadn't caught—" "But it did catch. That's what matters." Levi started laughing, a sound none of them had heard from him in months. Crow's gonna lose his mind. That warehouse had everything he needed to maintain his operation. Without it, he's crippled. "He's also going to be really, really angry," Eli pointed out, "which means he's going to come at us harder than before." The laughter died. "Let him come," Jay said. "We've been running and hiding and defending. Maybe it's time we showed him what happens when you push people too far." Marin wanted to agree, wanted to believe they could win this through sheer determination. But she'd seen too many people die believing that courage could overcome superior firepower. "We need allies," she said. "Real ones. Not just the Chen family and a few anonymous supporters. We need people willing to stand up publicly against Crow. And how do we get that, Levi asked. We give them proof that he can be beaten. The warehouse fire is a start, but it's not enough. We need to expose him completely, show everyone exactly what he is. Over the next 3 days, they put together a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. They would take all the evidence Marin had compiled, the names, the dates, the routes, the crimes, and make it public. Not by going to authorities who were already bought off, but by printing it in newspapers across the territory. The problem was getting newspapers to print something that would make them targets. That's where Dutch came in. Marin rode back into Dust Halo alone, in broad daylight this time, and walked straight into the saloon like she'd never left. Dutch nearly dropped the glass he was cleaning when he saw her. "You've got a death wish," he said. "Probably, but I need your help." She explained the plan. Dutch listened while continuing to clean glasses, his face unreadable. "You want me to use my contacts to get this information published?" he said when she finished. "Yes." "Which will make me a target?" "Yes." "And probably get me killed?" "Possibly." Dutch set down the glass. "You know, I had a daughter once. She'd be about your age now if she'd lived. Died from fever when she was 8. My wife followed her 6 months later from grief. I've been waiting to join them ever since." "Dutch, I'm saying yes. I'm saying I'll help you. Because maybe dying while trying to do something good is better than just waiting around to die from nothing." He had contacts, a newspaper editor in the territorial capital who owed him money, a printer in a neighboring town who hated Crow, a telegraph operator who could spread information faster than any newspaper. Between them, they could create a storm of publicity that would force people to acknowledge what Crow had been doing. "How long will it take?" Marin asked. "To get the story out. 3 days? Maybe 4? To get people to act on it? That's harder to predict." "We might not have 4 days. Then you'd better hope Crow's still focused on finding you instead of figuring out what you're planning." That hope died the next morning when Eli failed to return from a supply run into town. He'd gone to pick up medicine and food from one of their anonymous supporters, a simple errand that should have taken 2 hours. When he wasn't back by noon, Marin knew something had gone wrong. By evening, a messenger arrived at the abandoned homestead. A boy, maybe 12 years old, trembling with fear. He carried a note written in handwriting none of them recognized. The message was simple. "We have the youngest. Come to Crow's compound alone if you want him back alive. You know who I mean." It was addressed to Marin. "It's a trap," Levi said immediately. "Obviously." "You can't go." "I have to." Rowan tried to sit up, grimacing with pain. "We all go. We don't trade Marin for Eli. We rescue Eli and make Crow pay for taking him." "There's no way to assault Crow's compound without getting everyone killed," Marin said. "It's fortified. He's got dozens of men, and we're 6 people with limited ammunition." 5 people, Jace corrected. "Rowan can't fight." "I can shoot a rifle lying down," Rowan argued. "You can barely stay conscious for more than a few hours. You're not fighting." They argued while Marin thought. Crow wanted her specifically, which meant this wasn't about Eli at all. It was about eliminating the one person who could testify against him, who knew all his secrets, who'd compiled evidence that could destroy him. If she surrendered, Crow would kill both her and Eli. If she didn't surrender, he'd kill Eli anyway and keep hunting her. Either way, Eli died. Unless she could find a third option. "What if I do go?" Marin said slowly, "but not alone. What if I bring something Crow wants more than revenge?" "Like what?" Noah asked. "Like all the evidence I've compiled. The original documents, maps, ledgers, everything. I offer to trade it for Eli, make Crow think he's won." "He'll just take the evidence and kill you both," Silas said. "Probably. Unless we make sure the evidence getting destroyed doesn't actually matter because copies are already spreading across the territory." Understanding dawned on Levi's face. "The newspapers. If Dutch can get the story published before you go to Crow, then trading the originals is meaningless." "Exactly. Crow gets what he thinks is a victory, we get Eli back, and by the time Crow realizes he's been played, the whole territory knows what he is." "That's assuming you survive the exchange," Jace pointed out. "Well, yeah, that's the tricky part." They debated variations of the plan for hours, but it kept coming back to the same basic truth. Marin would have to put herself in Crow's hands and trust that she could stay alive long enough for the newspapers to publish. The odds were terrible, but Eli was family, and family meant doing terrible odds things because the alternative was unthinkable. Marin rode to Dust Halo that night and found Dutch in the saloon's cellar already working on getting the story distributed. He'd sent telegrams to his contacts, prepared packages of documents to be delivered by riders, even convinced the local printer to run off 50 copies of a broadsheet detailing Crow's crimes. "How long before it's public?" Marin asked. 24 hours. Maybe less. The telegraph to the capital is already sent. The printer's running copies now. By tomorrow afternoon, every major settlement in the territory will know what Crow's been doing. Good. Because I'm going to need that as insurance when I walk into his compound tomorrow morning. Dutch looked at her like she'd grown a second head. That's suicide. Maybe, but it's the only way to get Eli back alive. And what happens when Crow realizes the evidence is already out there? Then he'll probably kill me. But at least it'll be for something that mattered. Dutch pulled a bottle of whiskey from a shelf and poured 2 glasses. "Your husband, the one who got killed, did you love him?" The question caught Marin off guard. "I thought I did. Turned out I just loved the idea of having someone who wouldn't leave." "And now? With the Calders?" Marin thought about Rowan's confession in the burning house, about Jace fighting men who insulted her, about Levi slowly learning to trust, about Eli writing everything down so their story wouldn't be forgotten, about the twins bickering to hide how much they cared. "Now I know what the real thing feels like," she said, "which makes dying for it easier. Or harder." "Yeah, that too." They drank in silence. The next morning, Marin prepared to ride into hell. She dressed in the cleanest clothes she had, braided her hair back, and checked her weapons one final time. The rifle would stay behind. Crow's men would take it immediately, but she had a small pistol tucked into her boot and a knife in her belt. Not enough to fight her way out, but enough to take a few of them with her if it came to that. The brothers wanted to accompany her, but she refused. "If this goes wrong, I need you alive," she told them. "Someone has to make sure the story gets told. Someone has to rebuild. That's you." Rowan pulled her aside before she left. He was standing now, though it clearly caused him pain. "Don't do this." "We both know I have to. There's always another choice. Not one that gets Eli back alive." Rowan grabbed her hand. His palms were still rough from years of ranch work, warm and solid and real. "I meant what I said in the fire. About loving you." "I know. So come back. That's all I'm asking. Just come back." Marin wanted to promise she would, wanted to say the words that would make him feel better. But she'd learned years ago that empty promises were crueler than hard truths. "I'll try," she said. "That's the best I can do." She kissed him then, quick and fierce and full of all the things she didn't know how to say out loud. Then she mounted her horse and rode toward Vernon Crow's compound before she could change her mind. The compound sat at the western edge of the Sangre Flats, a sprawling ranch that had been built more like a fortress than a home. High walls surrounded the main buildings. Guard towers stood at each corner. Armed men patrolled the perimeter. Marin rode up to the main gate and waited. A guard approached, rifle raised. "State your business." "I'm here to see Vernon Crow. Tell him Marin Vale is here to make a trade." The guard disappeared inside. 5 minutes later, the gates opened. Marin rode through into the compound, very aware that she was now inside a cage with no way out. Men watched her from every direction. Not curious, calculating, trying to figure out if she was brave or stupid. She still hadn't decided which she was. The main house was larger than the entire Calder ranch had been, built from stone and timber that must have cost a fortune to transport across the frontier. Everything about it screamed wealth and power. Vernon Crow waited on the front steps. He was older than Marin remembered, maybe 60 now, with silver hair and a face like weathered leather. He wore expensive clothes that looked out of place on the frontier, and he held himself with the confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences for his actions. "Mrs. Vale," he said, voice smooth as oil. "I'd heard you were dead." "People keep assuming that. I'm starting to take it personally." "You've caused me considerable trouble. You've caused me more. Where's Eli?" Crow gestured, and 2 of his men dragged Eli out of the house. The youngest Calder brother was bruised and bleeding but alive. When he saw Marin, his eyes went wide with horror. "Marin, don't!" One of the guards hit him, cutting off the protest. He's alive and relatively undamaged, Crow said. As promised. Now you mentioned a trade? Marin pulled out the saddlebag she'd prepared. Inside were all the original documents she'd compiled about Crow's operation. Maps, ledgers, letters, everything. She'd even included her own handwritten testimony describing what she'd witnessed years ago. Everything I know about your operation, she said. Every crime, every name, every route. In exchange for Eli and safe passage out of your territory. Crow took the bag and examined its contents. His face remained neutral, but Marin saw his jaw tighten when he recognized certain documents. This is everything? He asked. Everything that matters. And you expect me to believe you didn't make copies? I expect you to believe I'm too smart to come here without insurance. If I don't walk out of here alive, those copies go public. But if you honor our deal, they disappear forever. It was a lie, of course. The copies were already spreading across the territory. But Crow didn't know that. Yet. He studied her for a long moment. You're a very troublesome woman, Mrs. Vale. So I've been told. Unfortunately, I've built my empire on being thorough, which means I can't take the chance that you're telling the truth about those copies. He nodded to his guards. They grabbed Marin before she could react, slamming her to the ground and kicking the pistol from her boot. Someone punched her in the stomach hard enough to empty her lungs. Another guard found the knife in her belt and tossed it aside. Marin! Eli screamed, struggling against the men holding him. Crow walked over and crouched beside her. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me where every copy of this evidence is located. You're going to give me the names of everyone you've shared it with. And then, if I'm feeling merciful, I'll kill you quickly instead of slowly. And if I don't tell you, then I'll start with the boy. See how long you can watch him suffer before you break. Marin tried to think of something defiant to say, some last brave statement, but all she could think was that she'd failed. Failed Eli. Failed the brothers. Failed everyone who'd trusted her to be smarter than this. Then she heard it. Horses. Lots of them. Coming fast. Crow heard it too. He stood up, frowning. What? The compound gates exploded inward as 20 riders charged through. Not Crow's men, ranchers from across the territory, armed and angry, with Levi Calder leading the charge. The Morrison family was there. The Chens, the Triple R widow, the Hendricks who'd been burned out. A dozen other families who'd suffered under Crow's rule and finally decided to fight back. Gunfire erupted across the compound. In the chaos, Marin rolled toward her discarded knife and grabbed it. One of Crow's guards tried to stop her, but she drove the blade into his leg, and he went down screaming. Eli had gotten free somehow and was running toward the horses. Marin sprinted after him, bullets kicking up dust around her feet. Someone grabbed her arm, Levi, pulling her onto his horse. Told you we wouldn't abandon you. They rode hard for the gates while the battle raged around them. Marin looked back and saw Crow standing in front of his burning compound, watching his empire collapse in real time. Then they were through the gates and racing across the flats toward freedom. The ride back to the abandoned homestead took an hour. When they arrived, Marin found the other brothers waiting, along with Dutch, the newspaper editor from the capital, and a territorial marshal wearing an official badge. What is this? Marin asked. The marshal stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm Marshal Raymond Cooper. I've been investigating Vernon Crow's operation for 6 months. Your evidence gave us everything we needed to issue arrest warrants and seize his properties. As of 2 hours ago, Crow is wanted by territorial and federal authorities. But the attack on his compound was concerned citizens exercising their right to defend themselves from an armed criminal. Perfectly legal. Dutch was grinning like an idiot. The story published this morning in 12 newspapers across the territory. By noon, every lawman worth a damn knew what Crow had done. The marshal here rode straight through to get here. Marin's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the dirt, trying to process what had just happened. They'd won. Against every odd, against superior numbers and firepower, against a man who'd terrorized the territory for years, they'd actually won. Rowan limped over and sat down beside her. You did it. We did it. All of us. No, you gave us something to fight for. You showed us that survival isn't the same as living. Marin leaned against him, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Is it over? Really over? Not yet, but close enough. Around them, the ranchers who'd joined the attack were celebrating. Families who'd been terrified were laughing. People who'd lost everything were finding hope again. And in that moment, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand together instead of falling separately, Marin finally understood what home actually meant. It wasn't a place. It was people. It was choosing to fight beside someone even when running would be easier. It was 6 brothers who'd given her a corner to sleep in and ended up giving her a reason to stay. The celebration didn't last long. By evening, reality started settling back in like cold settling into bones. Crow's compound had been raided, his organization scattered, and warrants issued for his arrest. But the man himself had vanished during the chaos, slipping away while his empire burned around him. Marshal Cooper promised he'd be found eventually, but Marin had lived long enough to know that men like Vernon Crow had escape routes planned before they ever needed them. "He's gone to ground somewhere," the marshal said, standing in the abandoned homestead that had become their makeshift headquarters. "Could be Mexico, could be further east. But we've got his face on wanted posters across 3 territories now. Someone will spot him." "And until then?" Levi asked. "Until then, you folks rebuild. The territorial governor has already nullified Crow's land claims. That means your ranch reverts to you legally, along with compensation for damages." Rowan, still weak but getting stronger daily, spoke up from where he sat. "What kind of compensation?" "Enough to rebuild. Maybe not what it was before, but enough to start over." It should have felt like victory, but Marin couldn't shake the feeling that unfinished business was still out there, waiting to destroy everything they'd fought for. She'd seen too many supposedly beaten enemies rise from the ashes to trust that Crow was truly gone. Over the next week, the Sangre Flats region transformed. Families that had been terrorized started reclaiming their land. The corrupt sheriff was arrested trying to flee to the Mexican border. Several of Crow's hired guns were rounded up and jailed. Dutch's Saloon became an unofficial community center where people gathered to share information and plan reconstruction efforts. But for Marin and the Calder brothers, the question of what came next hung heavy over everything. The ranch was gone, burned to the foundation with nothing salvageable except the land itself. They had money now from the territorial compensation, but rebuilding would take months, maybe years. And winter was coming again, the season that had nearly killed them once already. "We could sell," Jay said one night as they sat around a fire outside the abandoned homestead. "Take the compensation money and the land value and start over somewhere else, somewhere without all these memories." "And go where?" Noah asked. "Do what?" "I don't know. Anywhere but here. Anything but ranching." Silas threw a stick into the fire. "Ma built that ranch from nothing, worked herself to death keeping it alive. And we're just going to abandon it?" "Ma's dead," Jay shot back. "The ranch is gone. Holding on to ghosts isn't the same as honoring them." They would have kept arguing, but Eli interrupted. "What does Marin think?" Everyone turned to look at her. Marin had been quiet since the raid on Crow's compound, processing everything that had happened. She'd come to the Sangre Flats running from her past, asking for nothing more than a corner to sleep in. Now she was being asked to help decide the future of an entire family. "I think," she said slowly, "that you're all asking the wrong question. This isn't about the ranch. It's about whether you want to keep being a family or go your separate ways. Because you can rebuild the ranch and still be miserable if you're only doing it out of obligation. Or you can sell everything and scatter, but you'll spend the rest of your lives wondering what you gave up." "So what's the right question?" Rowan asked. "The right question is what makes you feel alive instead of just surviving. Because I've spent years just surviving, and it's a shit way to live." Levi stared into the fire. "I feel alive when I'm working land that's mine. When I can look at something I built with my own hands and know it'll still be there tomorrow. I feel alive when I'm fighting for something that matters," Jay said quietly. "When there's a purpose beyond just getting through another day." The twins looked at each other in that silent communication they had. "We feel alive when we're together," Noah said. "All of us. Even when we're arguing." Eli pulled out his journal. "I feel alive when I'm writing things down, making sure stories don't get forgotten. Whether that's here or somewhere else doesn't matter as much as having something worth writing about." Rowan was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I feel alive when I'm taking care of people I love. When I can make sure everyone under my roof is safe and fed and has a reason to wake up in the morning. That's what Ma did. That's what I want to keep doing." They all looked at Marin again, waiting. "I feel alive right now," she said. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm part of something instead of running from everything. So if you're asking whether I want to help rebuild the ranch, the answer is yes. If you're asking whether I'm planning to stay, the answer is also yes. If you're asking whether I'm scared that something will go wrong and I'll lose all of this, the answer to that is yes too, but I'm done letting fear make my decisions. Rowan smiled, a real smile that made him look years younger. Then I guess we're rebuilding. The decision made, they started planning. The territorial compensation would cover materials and labor. Several neighboring families offered to help with construction in exchange for the Calders' help rebuilding their own properties. Even Dutch volunteered to oversee supply procurement, using his network of contacts to get materials at fair prices. But before they could start building, Marin insisted they needed to finish one more thing. "We need to find Crow," she said. "As long as he's out there, none of us are safe." Marshal Cooper had moved on to other investigations, leaving the hunt for Crow to local law enforcement. But local law enforcement was overwhelmed with cleaning up the mess Crow had left behind. Nobody was actively pursuing him. "Let him go," Rowan urged. "We won. That's enough." "It's not enough. Not while he can come back and destroy everything we're trying to build." "So what do you want to do? Hunt him down ourselves?" "If we have to." Levi stood up. "I'm in. That bastard nearly killed all of us. He doesn't get to just walk away." "This isn't about revenge," Marin said. "This is about making sure he can't hurt anyone else." "Sounds like revenge with better marketing," Jace muttered. But he stood up too. "I'm still in." One by one, the brothers agreed. Even Eli, who'd been the most traumatized by his kidnapping, nodded his consent. They spent 3 days tracking down leads, bribing former Crow associates for information, following rumors, checking every possible escape route a man with money and desperation might use. The trail led them to a small border town called Serpent Creek, 40 miles south. It was the kind of place people went to disappear. No law, no questions, just survival and vice. Crow was holed up in a boarding house under a fake name, waiting for a contact who could get him across the Mexican border. Marin learned this from the boarding house owner's wife, who was tired of being paid in threats instead of cash. "He's armed," the woman warned, "and paranoid. Sleeps with a gun under his pillow and doesn't trust anybody." "How many men does he have with him?" "2, both mean as rattlesnakes." Marin thanked her and rejoined the brothers in the boarding house's saloon. "He's here, second floor, room at the end of the hall. 2 guards. "So we go up there and drag him out," Jay said. "Or we wait for him to come down and grab him in public," Levi suggested. "Or," Eli said quietly, "we let the law handle it. We've already sent word to Marshal Cooper. He could be here in a day or 2. "And give Crow time to slip away again?" Jace shook his head. "No. We end this now." They debated strategy until Rowan made the final call. "We confront him, give him a chance to surrender. If he refuses, we bring him in by force. But we do this smart. No unnecessary violence, no revenge killing. We're better than that." Marin wasn't sure she was better than that. Part of her wanted Crow dead for everything he'd done. But Rowan was right. Becoming the kind of people who killed in cold blood would make them no different than the man they were hunting. They moved on the boarding house at dawn, when Crow's guards would be tired and less alert. Marin and Levi went up the back stairs while the twins covered the front. Jace positioned himself in the alley below Crow's window in case he tried to escape that way. Rowan and Eli waited with the horses, ready for a quick extraction. The hallway creaked under Marin's boots despite her attempts at stealth. She reached Crow's door and listened. Inside, she could hear voices. Crow arguing with someone about money. She looked at Levi, who nodded. He'd kicked the door while she went in first, rifle raised. But before they could move, gunfire erupted from inside the room. Someone screamed. Glass shattered. More gunshots, wild and panicked. Levi kicked the door open and they rushed inside to find chaos. One of Crow's guards was dead on the floor, shot through the chest. The other guard was struggling with a third man Marin didn't recognize. They were fighting over a pistol, rolling across the floor, smashing furniture. Crow himself was gone. The window stood open, curtains blowing in the morning breeze. Marin ran to the window and looked down. Crow was in the alley, trying to fight off Jace, who'd intercepted him, but Crow was bigger and stronger, and Jace was still recovering from his injuries. Without thinking, Marin climbed out the window onto the narrow ledge. It was a stupid risk. One slip, and she'd fall 2 stories onto hard-packed dirt. But she didn't have time for smart decisions. She dropped down onto the awning below, rolled off its edge, and landed in the alley just as Crow got his hands around Jace's throat. "Let him go," Marin said, pointing her rifle at Crow's head. Crow looked at her and smiled, actually smiled. "You won't shoot me. You're too civilized for that." "Try me." "You've already won, Mrs. Vale. My empire's destroyed, my assets seized, my men scattered. What more do you want?" "I want you to pay for what you've done. And I will. I'll stand trial, probably hang. But you won't be the one to kill me. That's not who you are." He was right, and Marin hated him for it. Crow must have seen the hesitation in her eyes because he suddenly lunged, not at her but at Jace, using the younger man as a shield. Marin couldn't shoot without hitting Jace. Then Levi appeared behind Crow and cracked him over the head with a rifle butt. Crow went down like a felled tree, unconscious before he hit the ground. "You were taking too long," Levi said. They tied Crow up and threw him in a wagon. The dead guard got left for local authorities to deal with. The living guard wisely ran the moment Levi let him go. By the time Marshal Cooper arrived the next day, Vernon Crow was already in chains and ready for transport to the territorial capital for trial. Cooper looked at Marin and the brothers with something like respect. "You folks did my job for me." "We did what needed doing," Rowan replied. "Well, Crow will hang for this. Multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, bribery, theft, and about a dozen other charges. You'll all need to testify at the trial." Marin nodded. She'd testify. She'd tell the truth about everything she'd seen, everyone he'd hurt, every crime she'd witnessed. And then, finally, she could put that part of her past to rest. The trial took place 6 weeks later in the territorial capital. Marin spent 3 days on the witness stand, recounting years of crimes and violence. The defense attorney tried to discredit her, called her a drifter, a liar, a woman of questionable morals. But the evidence backed up everything she said, and the jury believed her. Vernon Crow was convicted on all charges. The judge sentenced him to hang. Marin attended the execution. She told herself it was for closure, but really she just needed to see it with her own eyes. Needed to watch the monster who'd shaped so much of her life finally face consequences. Crow saw her in the crowd and smiled one last time before the hood went over his head. Even at the end, he was trying to maintain control. The drop was quick, efficient, over in seconds. Marin waited until the body was cut down and loaded into a wagon before she left. She didn't feel the catharsis she'd expected, didn't feel vindicated or relieved or any of the emotions people talked about when justice was served. She just felt tired. Rowan was waiting outside with the wagon they'd borrowed for the trip. "How do you feel?" "Empty." "Is that good or bad?" "I don't know yet." They rode back to the Sangre Flats in silence, watching the landscape roll by. The territory looked different now, less hostile, more like home. Or maybe Marin was the one who'd changed. The ranch was taking shape by the time they returned. The frame of a new house stood where the old one had burned. It was smaller than before, more practical, but it was solid. The barn had been rebuilt first. Priorities dictated that shelter for animals came before comfort for humans. Fences were going up, water systems being installed, neighbors stopping by to help and share meals. It looked like hope taking physical form. Marin threw herself into the work. She helped plane boards, dig post holes, mix mortar. Physical labor that left her too exhausted to think. The brothers worked alongside her, and slowly the ranch became real again. 3 months after Crow's execution, the house was finished enough to move into. It smelled like fresh wood and paint. None of the brothers' mother's belongings had survived the fire, so they furnished it with new things. Chairs that didn't match, a table built from salvaged timber, curtains sewn by the Chen family's daughters. It should have felt wrong, this new house with no history, but instead it felt like a beginning. The first night in the new house, Marin stood on the porch, watching the sun set over the Sangre Flats. The land stretched out forever, red and gold in the dying light. In the distance, she could see other ranches being rebuilt, other families starting over. "We should talk about what happens next," Rowan said, joining her on the porch. "I thought we already decided. We rebuild the ranch, raise cattle, survive." "I'm not talking about the ranch. I'm talking about us." Marin's heart started beating faster. "What about us?" "You've been here almost a year now. You've helped us survive winter, fought a war, testified at a murder trial, and rebuilt our home. At what point do we stop calling you hired help and start calling you family? I thought I already was family. You are. But I'm asking if you want to be more than that. Marin turned to look at him. Rowan's face was healing from the burns, scars visible but fading. He looked stronger than he had in months, like the weight he'd been carrying had finally lightened. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Marin said. I'm asking if you want to stay permanently, not as someone passing through, not as someone working off a debt, but as someone who belongs here, with me, with all of us. Rowan, us all. You don't have to answer now. I just need you to know that you have a place here, for as long as you want it. Marin thought about the life she'd lived before coming to Dust Halo. The running, the loneliness, the constant fear of being found. She thought about the woman who'd asked for just a corner to sleep in because she'd learned not to expect more than survival. That woman felt like a stranger now. I want to stay, Marin said. Not because I'm scared to leave or because I don't have anywhere else to go. I want to stay because this is the first place that ever felt like home. Rowan pulled her close, and she let him. Let herself believe that maybe safety wasn't an illusion, that maybe love wasn't just another word for weakness, that maybe she'd finally found the place she'd been running toward all along. The wedding happened in spring, 6 months after the ranch was rebuilt. It was a small ceremony, just the brothers, some neighboring families, Dutch, and the territorial judge who'd presided over Crow's trial. Marin wore a dress borrowed from the Morrison family's eldest daughter. Rowan wore his best shirt with the collar buttons done up properly for the first time in years. Eli read a passage from one of his stories, something about how families aren't found in blood, but in the choice to stand beside someone when running would be easier. It made Marin cry, which she hadn't expected. The celebration afterward was loud and chaotic and perfect. People drank too much, told stories that got more exaggerated with each retelling, and danced to music played on a harmonica that Eli had finally learned to control. Jace got into a fight with one of the Morrison brothers over something stupid, but they were laughing while they wrestled in the dirt, so Marin didn't intervene. Levi actually smiled, a genuine smile that made him look almost human. The twins performed some kind of coordinated dance that involved a lot of stumbling and falling over each other. It was messy and imperfect and completely human. Late that night, after everyone had gone home or passed out drunk in the barn, Marin and Rowan sat on the porch of their new house and watched the stars. You think it'll last? Marin asked. All of this? Nothing lasts forever, but we'll hold on to it as long as we can. That's not very reassuring. Would you rather I lie? Maybe a little, Rowan laughed. Fine. We're going to live happily ever after, have a dozen children, die peacefully in our sleep at age 90, and the ranch will prosper for generations. Better? Much better. Even though we both know it's not true. Some of it might be true. We might have kids. The ranch might prosper. Marin thought about that. About children who would grow up knowing safety instead of running from it. About a future that extended beyond just surviving the next day. I don't know how to be a mother, she admitted. I barely know how to be a wife. Nobody knows how to be anything until they try. We'll figure it out together. Over the next year, they did figure it out. The ranch started producing profit again. They bought new cattle, hired a few ranch hands, established trade relationships with settlements across the territory. The Calder name stopped being associated with tragedy and started being associated with resilience. Marin learned to run a household without feeling like she was waiting for it to be taken away. She learned to trust that morning would come and the people she cared about would still be there. She learned that love wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about mending shirts without being asked, about making coffee before dawn, about standing on a porch together watching nothing happen. Jace eventually moved to town and became the unofficial town marshal after the official one proved ineffective. He still got into fights occasionally, but now he was getting paid for it. Levi stayed on the ranch, taking over most of the day-to-day operations as Rowan's burns continued to limit his physical labor. He remained paranoid and suspicious, but he channeled it into making the ranch the most secure property in the territory. The twins got married within months of each other. Noah to a schoolteacher from Dust Halo, Silas to one of the Chen daughters. They built houses on opposite ends of the property and competed constantly over whose family was happier. Eli left for the eastern cities like he'd always dreamed, but he came back every summer with new stories and new books, and he wrote constantly about the frontier family that had taught him what courage actually meant. And Marin stopped running. She built a life instead, had 2 children who grew up hearing stories about how their mother had burned down a warehouse and helped bring down a criminal empire. Taught them that survival wasn't enough. You had to live fully, love completely, and fight for the people who mattered. On quiet evenings, she'd sit on the porch with Rowan and watch the sun set over the Sangre Flats. The land that had once seemed so hostile now felt like protection. The emptiness that had scared her now felt like space to breathe. "Do you ever regret it?" Rowan asked one night when they were both gray-haired and their children had children of their own. Staying here instead of moving on? Marin thought about the question seriously, about all the paths she hadn't taken, all the lives she might have lived. "No," she said finally. "This was always where I was supposed to end up. I just had to run through hell to find it." Was it worth it? She looked at the ranch they'd built together, the house full of family and noise and life, the land that fed them, the community that supported them. She thought about the woman who'd arrived in Dust Halo asking for just a corner to sleep in, so broken she couldn't imagine wanting more. That woman would barely recognize the life Marin had now. "Yeah," Marin said, "it was worth it." Years later, when Marin was too old to work the ranch but too stubborn to stop trying, the territory officially became a state. The Sangre Flats region was recognized for its role in exposing corruption and building a community based on mutual support rather than fear. The Calder Ranch became something of a landmark, the place where ordinary people had stood up against power and won, where a drifter woman and 6 grieving brothers had formed a family that became a symbol of frontier resilience. Marin lived long enough to see her grandchildren running through the same fields where she'd once fought for survival. Long enough to know that the home they'd built wasn't just physical structures, but a legacy of courage and community that would outlive them all. When she finally died, peacefully, in her sleep, surrounded by family, they buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch. The headstone read simply, "Marin Vale Calder. She asked for a corner and built a home." The story should end there, with a woman who'd spent half her life running finally finding rest. But stories don't really end. They just get passed down to the next generation. Eli's books made sure of that. He'd written everything down, the burning warehouse, the blizzard siege, the final confrontation with Crow. He'd written about how his family had been saved by a woman who'd asked for nothing and given everything. The book spread across the frontier, becoming the kind of stories people told around campfires. Some of the details got exaggerated over time. Some got simplified. But the core truth remained that survival isn't the same as living, that family is something you choose as much as something you're born into, and that home is wherever you stop running long enough to build something that matters. Dutch, who outlived Marin by 3 years, told anyone who would listen that she was the bravest woman he'd ever met. Not because she never got scared, but because she kept moving forward despite being terrified. The ranch itself continued for generations, passed down through the Calder family line. It survived droughts and economic downturns and all the other disasters that plague frontier life. Because it was built on something stronger than luck or land, it was built on the stubborn refusal to abandon the people who mattered. And sometimes, on clear evenings when the wind blew just right across the Sangre Flats, visitors to the ranch swore they could see lights burning in every window. Lanterns left on until everyone came home, just like they used to do when the brothers were trying to hold back darkness after losing their mother. Just like Marin had kept doing, long after she'd stopped being afraid of the dark. Because that's what home was. Not a place without fear, but a place where fear couldn't make you run anymore. Where you stood your ground not because you were unafraid, but because the people beside you were worth being afraid for. Marin had spent her whole life looking for that kind of home. And in the end, she hadn't found it. She'd built it. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one stubborn refusal to give up at a time. Until the corner she had asked for became a ranch that sheltered generations. Until the woman who'd expected nothing became the foundation everything else was built on. Until running towards something proved stronger than running from everything. And that was the story the frontier remembered. Not of a perfect woman who saved everyone, but of a broken woman who stayed when leaving would have been easier. Who chose love over safety, family over survival, and building over running. It wasn't a story about winning. It was a story about what it cost to stop losing. And in the end, that was the only story that mattered.